Not long after, the door closed automatically with a loud bang, surprising everyone. Once it was shut, the vice guild leader tried to open it again, but it wouldn't budge. Some people attempted to force it open with attacks, but the door didn't move at all despite their efforts. Jared, seeing this, tried to open it himself, but before he could, several puppet-like creatures with red eyes and maid outfits suddenly appeared and attacked. Jared fought back with his punches, quickly sending the puppets flying and shattering their bodies. Everyone else stayed alert, knowing the enemy could strike unexpectedly like before. A surprising event occurred. The shattered statues began to rise and recover. The ability to revive? Very interesting, Jared said, laughing happily and readying his skills. 2 large hands appeared beside him, a remarkable skill. Jared then slammed the statue with his large hands, driving it into the ground. Others joined in the attack. You're not in the betting pool, are you? So, what about you? Shin said, explaining that he only supported them through weapon production, while Yeren remarked that she wasn't keen on putting an effort for such a team. That's why Yeren joined this red dungeon. She felt a little excited and had heard that Korea's strongest hunter was there, but they didn't meet her expectations. They couldn't defeat the puppets. If Yeren had known it would be like this, she would have declined the invitation from the Manhwa guild. According to Shin, the puppets were strange because the contaminated monsters didn't take normal forms. Then Shin noticed something. He saw strings on the puppets' bodies and tried to trace where they came from. Following the strings, he spotted an object on the ceiling, and all the strings were connected to it. In truth, Shin didn't want to show off his skills, but there was a great chance of defeating the puppets if someone destroyed that object. Feeling he had the ability to erase memories, Shin intended to destroy the object. Suddenly, Yeren prepared to unleash her skill in the form of S-crystals that electrocuted insects. Yeren only used her skill to kill things she wanted dead. For instance, if there were insects nearby, Yeren could easily kill them with her electric element. Shin realized Yeren was actually afraid of insects, which was why she only killed them. At the same time, Shin executed his plan using Yeren's power to destroy the object. The object was contaminated, and only Shin could see it. Shin's plan began. He pointed upward and used his skill to create a replica of an insect monster. Shin placed the insect right next to the object suspected of being the source of contamination, successfully luring Yeren to use her skill on it. Yeren also directed her fire element at the insect. The artificial insect Shin made was destroyed, along with the object. Jared was confused because Yeren suddenly directed her fire attack there, but soon after, the puppets stopped moving. They were all puzzled by what happened. The puppets suddenly ceased to move, and Shin's hunch was correct. The object was the source of the puppet's revival ability. If Shin hadn't been able to see the contamination, he might not have found it, and the object could have been why the red dungeon failed in the past. This time, they managed to clear the lobby, but to be sure, they continued checking the entire first floor, led by the deputy leader of the Overkill Guild. As expected, they still encountered other puppets along the way. Move aside, I'll go first, Jared said excitedly, eager to defeat the puppets, while Shin always managed to locate objects suspected of being contaminated by mana. Then Shin instructed Melissa to shoot at the spot he pointed out. Although Sung Jae-ho didn't understand, he obeyed. Melissa's shot successfully destroyed the object, and they resolved the problem easily. In this way, they explored the entire room and completed the first floor with relative ease. This time they continued their journey to the second floor. Come this way, Craig said, while Jared suddenly felt irritated because Craig ignored him. Jared thought he might have pushed himself too hard in the earlier fight. Meanwhile, Shin still felt uneasy, even though Craig's earlier words seemed reassuring. But to be certain, Shin wanted to inspect the room himself, and sure enough, Shin found something like a thread wrapped around an object. More precisely, it was contaminated mana. While the others were now fighting something that attacked at high speed, Jared couldn't use his skills because he had to hold his ground. Are you all okay? Craig asked. They struggled to fend off each incoming attack, then said they were fine, except they couldn't see anyone else under Craig. They were referring to Shin. Craig was surprised to realize that Shin was not with them, while Shin himself was elsewhere, still busy absorbing the contaminated mana. Then Shin heard Craig's voice calling his name repeatedly. Shin realized that the others were in a difficult battle, but fortunately, he had finished absorbing all the mana. However, when Shin wanted to rejoin the others immediately, he suddenly saw a figure appear. It turned out to be just a little girl carrying a doll. Shin was shocked. How could there be a little girl in a dungeon like this, let alone what was she doing in such a place? You're a hunter, aren't you? Said the girl. Then the girl told Shin to follow her. She knew Shin was a hunter because her older sister, who was below, had told her that a hunter would come to save her sister and that she would leave with the hunter when the time came. According to the girl, Shin's presence here meant he was the hunter who would save her sister, so he followed the little girl. However, the girl felt strange because, even though she was sure Shin was the hunter her sister mentioned, Shin seemed unaware of the situation. After assessing the situation, Shin was quite certain the woman had been affected by a serious mental attack. Shin then tried talking to her, explaining he had been sent to the dungeon by the Korean Hunters Association. Hearing the words Hunters Association, the woman immediately responded. Shin then asked her to explain her situation. The woman explained that she was the 4th scout sent into the dungeon. Since the first 3 scouts hadn't returned, she was ordered to investigate and search for the 3rd scout. However, once inside the dungeon, dolls from all directions began running towards her. She was so shocked that she tried to exit through the gate, but the door closed and wouldn't open, trapping her inside. Yes, the situation was the same for Shin. The woman kept calling the other scouts to check the entrance, but something strange happened. The scouts seemed unaware and suddenly tried to attack her, so she ran away and eventually met the child. She felt helped by the child, whose name was Elizabeth Colbett. Shin then suggested they leave together since the dungeon was very dangerous, but Elizabeth replied that it was even more dangerous outside. Back at Craig's location, they were still enduring the attacks. Craig's enemy realized something. The disguise technique the enemy was using was gradually fading, and the enemy seemed about to reveal himself. Suddenly, the enemy dropped something resembling a personal ID card, according to Craig. It must have been a scout's ID card, and his face matched the missing scout document Craig had received from the association. It turned out the enemy attacking them was the scout previously declared missing. Disguise is a skill that can't be used for several minutes after its duration ends, and it drastically reduces movement speed. Initially, he thought it was a monster capable of using disguise skills, but it was just a scout. Jared intended to kill them all in one breath this time, but suddenly something scratched his nose, causing it to bleed. It was Melissa who stopped Jared. According to Melissa, they weren't monsters but people who needed saving. There might even be a way to return the scouts to their original state. But Jared said that, in the current situation, there were only 2 options, kill or be killed. Jared didn't care who they were. If they showed hostility towards him, he would deal with them, including Melissa, because she had shot him before. If Melissa tried to stop Jared again this time, Jared would kill Melissa before the scouts. Craig then spoke up, attempting to stop Jared and asked him to listen first. Craig made a deal with Jared. Craig would give all the rewards and funding for the Red Dungeon to the Manhwa Guild. Finally, Jared agreed and gave Craig time to find a way to return the scouts to normal. But if time ran out and Craig hadn't found a solution, Jared would destroy the dolls. Among the dolls, one looked very intimidating. Elizabeth herself didn't know how, but they were covered in purple threads that wouldn't die unless removed, and they would continue attacking relentlessly. Plus, the threads were strong and difficult to destroy. Shin also asked Elizabeth if they could return to normal as before because if they could, he wanted to help his colleague return to normal. According to Elizabeth, someone had to stop the device attached to the doll's body when the thread was severed. However, if the thread was cutting correctly, the person's body would be destroyed. Shin was surprised that, even with such a difficult question, Elizabeth could answer with an explanation without hesitation and also be kind. Should I ask once again? Shin said, returning to the other battle. They endured while thinking of ways to return the Parker to its normal state. In seconds, after its disguise, recovery occurred. However, if they weren't successful, they would all die. The countdown started from T, growing more tense as it reached 1. Jared prepared to throw his punch, but at the same time, the pain felt by the game returned, and consequently, his skill use was cancelled or failed. "Huh, you stopped that ability just in time. We barely saved them. Leave it to me from here," said Shin, who had just arrived with Elizabeth. Continuing from the previous story, Shin arrived at his team's location with a little girl named Elizabeth. Shin said the reason he left earlier was that he had to check something first, which left his team behind. After checking, Shin found nothing unusual and told his team not to worry too much. Craig was relieved that nothing strange had happened and that John was back in good condition. However, according to Craig, this was a dungeon, so it was better not to act alone. Soon after, John's team was shocked by Scout because Scout could now use his abilities again. It was a secret ability they hadn't seen. Knowing this, Craig immediately became alert, protecting Shin and the little girl behind him while Scout quickly moved and attacked them together. But this time, it seemed Scout targeted Shin and the girl behind him. Thanks to the threads made of contaminated mana, Shin could clearly see their shape. The threads completely covered Scout's body, and thanks to Shin's abilities, he could finally see Scout's doll's weak spot. Shin would mark them first before finally attacking Scout's weak point. After Shin successfully identified the weak point, he asked his team members for assistance so they could target it accurately, ensuring the Scout's body wasn't destroyed. Craig understood what Shin meant. The markings, like blue fragments, were clearly visible even when the Scout couldn't be seen, allowing Craig and the others to easily track its movements and target its weak spot. Without hesitation, Craig immediately attacked with the hilt of his sword. The strike hit the mark, impacting the weak point Shin had previously identified. He successfully took down one Scout, which then retreated and stopped moving. "I didn't expect they could actually be targeted this way," Craig said. To simplify the information, Craig explained briefly, succinctly, and clearly to Jared's team that the blue circle in the center was the parachute's weak point. Eventually, Jared's team attacked precisely at the weak point and managed to stop the parachutes without damaging their original bodies. Why did they suddenly stop? Jared asked, surprised. Actually, they aren't broken, they just stopped moving and aren't attacking anymore, Craig replied. Feeling secure, Craig asked Shin about something. Craig was curious about what Shin had checked on the first floor earlier. Shin told him that he hadn't found anything special while inspecting the place. He was merely investigating the dungeon when he happened to encounter a little girl and brought her to the location of a scout that had survived. The scout was already mentally affected and couldn't accompany him. The next question was about the child Shin had brought along. They were very curious about the information regarding the child Shin had brought. Shin didn't elaborate in detail, simply stating that the child helped him find the weak point and a way to strengthen the scout without destroying its original body. However, Jared was skeptical about a child suddenly appearing in the dungeon. He believed that the child's parents might be trapped in the dungeon. That's suspicious, Jared said. Meanwhile, Loli, a woman with firearm skills, was furious at Jared for suspecting a cute-looking child with an adorable smile. Jared also felt emotional, claiming he wasn't wrong to say that because, logically, how could a Loli suddenly be in the dungeon without a detailed explanation? If the reason was that Loli was lost, that was also unlikely because, according to him, the dungeon's location had been kept secret and the association always guarded the entrance gate tightly. Shin tried to calm the dispute between them, saying he understood Jared's reasoning but that it wasn't good to judge someone too quickly. You're just looking for faults in what I said, right? Damn it, you keep acting like a loser because I'm going easy on you. Should I kill all your guild members? Jared said, not accepting Craig's statement. You know I don't like meaningless fights, but I think now it's necessary to teach you a lesson in this red dungeon. Right? Craig said, also not accepting Jared's statement. Eventually, the team members also became emotional. They were all equally emotional after their guild leaders argued, and even each guild leader was ready to use their signature moves. Craig used his fire abilities while Jared used his ice abilities. Meanwhile, Shin felt something was off. This time, he could sense that both parties' emotions continued to rise, and neither was willing to back down. What is really happening in a situation like this? John asked. Then the little girl spoke, revealing her true nature. She said that all she did was push their emotions slightly, but she hadn't expected that their emotions would actually trigger a dispute and even a fight like this. That's truly pathetic, the little girl said. It turned out that the little girl received help from her boss, allowing her to use mind control abilities on humans. Eventually, the little girl managed to get this far without being suspected when Shin first met her. Shin had already suspected that the little girl was a monster, and the question for himself was when he started thinking that the little girl was just an ordinary child. The biggest possibility was that Shin had been brainwashed since he first saw the little girl. Now it was too late, even though Shin was beginning to realize it. Shin also tried to stop the little girl before his friends were brainwashed. If that happened, it would be challenging to get them all back unless the little girl was stopped. As Shin was about to attack the little girl without realizing it, threads contaminated with mana were already wrapped around his body. Shin also realized that the threads were binding the others as well. How could everyone be brainwashed? I didn't expect her to use contaminated mana to manipulate not only the physical but also the mind. I failed to see through her lies from the beginning, Shin thought, but it seemed the girl was mistaken. She had made Shin her opponent without knowing he possessed a unique mana absorption ability that could absorb contaminated mana. They returned to consciousness thanks to Shin's ability, which successfully absorbed and severed the threads of contamination. What happened? Jared asked as he and the others woke up. The girl laughed, admitting she had been deceived by the seemingly naive young man. But it turned out that the seemingly naive young man named Shin actually knew how to use his ability to absorb contaminated mana. Interesting, the little girl said, apparently forming a new plan to face the naive young man who had deceived her while Shin moved away and joined the others, informing them that the little girl was actually the enemy in disguise. Since the little girl felt she was about to be beaten by a group of adults, she called her parents to come and help her. Soon after, the little girl's parents appeared from the sky and landed forcefully, causing the ground they stood on to tremble, and the little girl complained to her parents that she had been bullied by the uncles and aunts present. Those people are bothering me, teach them a lesson, the little girl said. Jared didn't accept it, as the little girl had previously treated him improperly and tried to brainwash him. Jared immediately advanced and attacked the little girl along with her parents. Who are they? I'll kill them all at once, Jared said. But his attack didn't hit the enemy, instead, it struck one of his own team members. The blow was so strong that one of his members was sent flying and hit something behind him. Wow, what are you doing, Jared? Craig said, confused because Jared attacked his own member. After further investigation, it turned out that Jared had been controlled by the little girl, and the one actually controlling him was the little girl's uncle, named Rowan. Also realizing something, Jared often said that his body suddenly felt pain, and Shin thought he had been fighting too hard before. It turned out that the pain was caused by mana contamination that had entered Jared's body first, and it was so thin that Shin hadn't suspected the existence of mana contamination in Jared's body at that time. That thin contamination was the little girl's opportunism. No one noticed it. Even Shin didn't suspect it earlier because Rowan's ability was to hide the presence of mana in Jared's body. This was indeed a complicated situation where you had to face your friends as enemies. Your friends had become puppets. "I'm curious about what will happen next," the little girl said. Craig immediately advanced and planned to stop and capture Jared. He also asked for help from the others. "Of course, with pleasure," said the girl with weapon skills. The fire was very pleased because she didn't like Jared's overly talkative nature before, and they launched attack after attack on Jared, and Jared deflected every attack coming at him. Suddenly, a strong ice shield appeared, covering Jared's body. One of Jared's members stated that it was a skill that activated when the guild master, Jared, felt a life-threatening danger. It was explained that the feeling couldn't be penetrated by any weapon and couldn't be disturbed for a certain period. Yes, it couldn't be disturbed, meaning the threads controlling him wouldn't work, and Rowan, who was hiding in Jared's body, would also be frozen, and Jared would remain frozen like that for the next few hours. This time one side of the enemy couldn't help in the fight, meaning there were only 3 enemies left, the little girl and her parents, and the battle between the hunter group and the monster group was about to begin. "Finish them off as soon as possible," the little girl said. Craig could sense the energy from the 2 enemies was different from the puppets he had seen before. He thought that the 2 opponents this time, if you considered them to be at a sufficiently challenging dungeon level, equivalent to boss monster strength, would be too dangerous to ignore and bypass the 2 guardian puppets protecting the girl. There was only one choice that could be made, and that was the safest one, to face them directly. Even though Craig still felt that something was strange and that the girl seemed to be hiding something, this oddity was only a feeling Craig had. Nonetheless, Craig felt different, sensing that the girl appeared to be more than just someone who liked to be in control. After coming up with a plan, he finally informed his team and Jared's team to focus on attacking the female doll, while Craig himself would attack the male doll. Craig's intentions and preparations for the assault were suddenly interrupted as the male doll launched itself while Craig was also readying himself with flames emanating from his sword. Meanwhile, Shin did not participate in the attack because, from the beginning, he was part of the team as a weapons maker. As long as he performed his duties as a weapons maker, he was free to do anything as long as it was within the guild's rules, and what Shin was doing now was observing the enemy's skills that did not work on Jared. According to Shin, the enemy's abilities seemed flawed or like a game system that had issues, and those problematic events were now happening to Jared. While he was thinking about the enemy's ability to turn hunters into dolls, Shin still felt something was amiss. Yes, at the time, the transformation into a doll that happened to Jared occurred instantly, but it happened after Shin had managed to absorb all the contaminated mana from everyone through his mana absorption ability before Shin used his absorption ability, and when everyone, including Shin himself, was bound by threads of contaminated mana. Elizabeth should have had the opportunity to turn them all into dolls right then and there, but oddly, Elizabeth did not do so. Whether Elizabeth did not want to do it or actually could not do it remains unknown. Shin moved to the battle location with his weapon skills, and Yeren, with her ice ability, attacked simultaneously and directed their attacks at the female guardian doll, but the female doll easily withstood the 2 attacks directed at her. Returning to Shin, who was still trying to understand Elizabeth's abilities. According to Shin, if Elizabeth's reason was just to play around, that was unlikely. Also, why did Elizabeth even reveal herself and say that she deliberately stirred emotions in Craig and Jared, nearly causing a fight among the guild members? Another oddity was that Elizabeth also guided Shin to a scout who was previously declared missing. And not only that, Elizabeth even told Shin that the students were weaker than those who had been turned into dolls before. After gaining Shin's trust, Elizabeth quickly revealed her true intentions, making everything in vain. According to Shin, Elizabeth's actions were not those of someone who merely wanted to enjoy internal conflict among guild members, and the conclusion from all of Shin's thoughts was that Elizabeth seemed to be forced to fight against something. The battle they faced now was fierce, and Craig also felt that the male doll had very strong defenses. However, with the weapon Shin had made for him, Craig could freely channel his power into the sword and maintain a level of control during the battle with the doll. A woman with the ability to use firearms was ready to launch her signature move. She had loaded the bullets with magical rounds, then fired them, successfully hitting the female doll's body. The woman with the ability to use heavy weapons attacked 2 guardian dolls. They were eventually defeated, but one remained. Now, only Elizabeth was left as an enemy, although Craig was actually worried about the little girl's mental attacks because, for someone like Craig, mental attacks were very dangerous. However, for now, Craig was confident he could withstand such mental attacks. Therefore, Craig directly charged toward Elizabeth, and before Craig could actually break Elizabeth's neck, she left. It was as if she had been waiting for what was happening to happen. Hey, look, it's all in vain to worry that they are really great. Yeren also didn't expect that the enemy this time could be dealt with so easily. First of all, the enemy talked a lot and acted strong. According to Shin, if it ended easily like this, then that's good. However, Shin's previous assumption was that Elizabeth was forced by something to fight, and it turned out Elizabeth's goal was for them to be able to kill the two guardian dolls and kill herself, and all that had a reason. This moment was not a good moment but a very bad one where the hunters fell silent not because of magic or mental attacks but because something very shocking had happened that they had never experienced or faced in previous situations. There was a shocking presence, and Shin suspected that it was the secret boss of the old vampire, Elizabeth Badori, and at the same time, Shin's system also provided a mission, which was to defeat Elizabeth Badori, with a reward of control over the devil's shackles. Elizabeth was grateful that they had killed the dolls of her father and mother because Elizabeth had previously been betrayed by her parents and placed in the body of a weak child, and now she could be free for a moment. While holding back cold sweat, Yeren gave orders to the others to be prepared because, although Craig was very talented, if his opponent was such a monster, he would not be able to handle it alone. Elizabeth immediately began the battle. With her opening ability as the first course, she used the ability to drain essence. As a result, they vomited blood instantly. Yeren was shocked that a high-ranking undead like Elizabeth was adept at absorption-type magic. But given the distance and number of people present, Elizabeth could do it without any preparation. However, Craig did not stand still even though he was injured by Elizabeth's attack just now. Craig continued to launch an attack, but Elizabeth easily blocked and even destroyed Craig's sword with just one hand and then hit Craig so hard that he was thrown at high speed and stopped after crashing into the rocks behind him. Then Shin approached Craig and said that the output Craig was using now was not as strong as when Craig fought the previous spider monster boss. However, given the current conditions, Craig admitted that he could never produce a stronger output than that moment. Shin also showed something to Craig because, previously, Shin had gathered a lot of contaminated mana and stored it in a storage space. Now it was time for Shin to demonstrate his new ability. He would create a demon weapon that would consume contaminated mana points and become a weapon named the Demon Sword Leviathan. Take this. It's your turn now, said Shin. In the previous story, Craig received the sword made by Shin. The name of the sword was the Demon Sword Leviathan. This sword was easy to grip and could provide various special abilities to its owner. The sword was powered by contaminated mana based on the energy Elizabeth sensed. According to her, it must be a special ability with a fire attribute, but Elizabeth did not feel panicked at all. Instead, she laughed happily. Then Elizabeth used her magic ability. After that, blood flowed, and the area where the blood was located was called. Shin was surprised because Elizabeth could use magic over a wide area. According to Shin, the magic was like absorption and sealing magic. Although the absorption power was not as much as Shin used before, it was still an ability that could be said to be versatile. It is said that this magic can paralyze the mana management and basic metabolism of its victims or targets. This ability will melt everything down to the bones, muscles, nerves, and veins, or it will pull the victim. However, after some time, the pain the victim feels will gradually diminish. Elizabeth was surprised when she saw that Craig could still move freely even though she had activated her ability. After thinking it over, Elizabeth realized that he was holding back something, meaning that even though he could move like that, his condition was not actually good. Yes, that's right, because Craig's movements were not of his own will and consciousness, but rather the ability of the sword. In fact, the strength Craig exerted was now stronger than before. For Elizabeth, this was not a big problem. Instead, it made her even more excited to destroy everyone in front of her. Craig quickly ran forward while Elizabeth prepared to use her blood magic ability. After that, a large blood-shaped hand appeared. Elizabeth immediately directed it at Craig, who was rushing toward her. Taehan easily slashed the blood hand with the Devil Sword Leviathan. What kind of power was that just mentioned? Elizabeth was surprised. According to her, that person's strength had at least doubled, maybe even more than doubled. Now, not only Elizabeth but even Shin himself was affected by Craig's current great power. Craig then slashed his sword again, cutting through the blood hand trying to protect Elizabeth. Elizabeth then attacked directly, seriously wounding her and leaving her powerless, unable to withstand the massive damage from Craig. At the same time, Shin managed to complete his mission while Elizabeth was helpless. Shin also received a reward from the system in the form of an item. Shin hoped to receive an item related to recovery or mana capacity. After that, Shin removed the Devil Sword Leviathan from Craig's grip, and the sword gradually became lighter. A notification then appeared, stating that the next time Shin used this ability, he wouldn't need to search separately and could manifest it directly. Meanwhile, Craig's hand was still trembling. Shin told him to calm down first because Shin knew Craig's condition, even though he was trying to stand. Craig still couldn't walk, But Shin was surprised that Craig could still maintain his consciousness after receiving massive damage from Elizabeth and using his ability with the great output from the Leviathan sword. Shin also told him to rest for a while and informed him that the lives of others were still safe, though they were unconscious. After that, Shin approached Elizabeth's body and found that she could still speak, even though her body was shattered and unable to move. Shin was confused as to why the system said that the red dungeon was cleared while Elizabeth was still alive. He was also puzzled that something was controlling that puppet. According to him, the puppet's mana was clearly the same contaminated mana he sensed from Elizabeth, even though Elizabeth herself did not have the ability to control puppets. However, the puppet still moved and prioritized protecting Elizabeth. Elizabeth responded that they indeed had to protect her because she was their valuable energy source, helping to protect them for a long time. In her past story, Elizabeth indulged them as she pleased, even though it was an action she should not have taken. At that time, Elizabeth saved them from the danger of monsters. At that time, Elizabeth felt there was something strange about them. They did not let Elizabeth, who had saved them, leave just like that. They invited her into their home. This was the beginning of Elizabeth feeling trapped. Elizabeth did not know when things started to change. Elizabeth was no longer considered a guest but as part of their family. Although this event felt short for Elizabeth, she felt very happy until she began to realize the reason why these people could accept her as their family. Elizabeth felt it was also her fault from the beginning for following those people, and also because Elizabeth gave them the chance to betray and control her from the first time they met. At the same time, this was proof that Elizabeth felt she had become soft and weak. That was Elizabeth's story of being trapped, and they placed her into a child's body. They also locked most of her abilities. Elizabeth could only provide the contaminated mana necessary to protect them. Protect them from what? Asked Shin, and Elizabeth answered that she was not sure either, but she thought the view outside the house was quite amazing, a vast, endless desert landscape. Elizabeth thought that the desert had no form and was not a natural desert but rather a space and protection created to protect the house. Elizabeth was sure that the person she considered a mother had used her power to create the desert. According to Elizabeth, the desert was likely created to protect them from the monsters across the rift. Seeing your reaction, your world must have rifts too, right? I think that's how you came here through the dimensional rift.